President Trump is doubling down on his backing of former British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson to replace outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May. And this comes just hours before the president leaves for his first state visit to the UK, where he will be meeting with Prime Minister May. So for more on this, let's bring in Director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom and former advisor to the late British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Nile Gardiner. Nile, thank you for coming on. And boy, we've got a lot to talk about. But let's start with this meeting between President Trump and the outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May. In addition to the president's backing of Boris Johnson for what's about to be her old job, there's quite a few other reasons why this may be a bit of an awkward meeting, right?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting meeting. After all, I think the relationship between Donald Trump and Theresa May has been at times quite strained. They're very different politicians, very different outlooks, and President Trump has been rightly so very critical of Theresa May's handling of Brexit. And just this morning in the British papers, he was giving further advice not only for Theresa May, but also to her successor as Prime Minister, to really take a much tougher approach with the EU and the Brexit negotiations. And
if I could just pause you right there, because I actually want to play that clip. President Trump telling the Sunday Times that the UK should sue the European Union and walk away from these Brexit negotiations. Listen here.
I wouldn't pay $50 billion. That's me. I'm only saying this from my standpoint. I would not pay. That's a tremendous number. If you don't get the deal you want, if you don't get a fair deal, then you walk away.
So, good advice, bad advice. What would actually happen if the UK takes that advice?
Well, I think it's actually very good advice, because the European Union has been absolutely unreasonable in the negotiations with Great Britain. And it's outrageous that Britain is having to pay £39 billion just to leave the European Union. And the deal that the EU is offering is an absolutely ghastly deal. And so I think the advice from the President is absolutely right, that Britain should walk away from the negotiations with the EU unless they get a very good deal. And a no deal Brexit is far better than a bad deal Brexit. So I think the President's advice is absolutely spot on. And I think the next British government, headed by a Brexiteer, will probably heed that advice and leave the European Union without a deal unless the EU is going to make some major concessions.
So if the UK does make a clean break from the European Union, President Trump is kind of dangling this unilateral trade deal with the United States. And he said in this interview today that he believes that that trade deal could happen very quickly. So how much of a sweetener could that be for the new prime minister, whoever it is?
Well, President Trump has promised a very big U.S.-U.K. free trade deal post-Brexit. And I think the U.S. and the U.K. have been negotiating this agreement already over the last 2 years. And as U.S. officials have pointed out, Britain will be at the front of the queue for a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States. And I think it's in Britain's national interest to implement this deal as soon as possible. And so President Trump has a very, very enthusiastic approach towards Brexit. This is exactly the approach the British government should have. Unfortunately, Theresa May has been half-hearted. She has been no Margaret Thatcher in terms of these negotiations with the European Union. And Britain clearly needs a new Prime Minister who can implement Brexit and also work very closely with the United States and put in place one of the largest trade deals in modern history together with the United States.
All right, well, President Trump leaves tomorrow morning. I mean, this is going to be one of his, or excuse me, he lands tomorrow in the UK. He's going to be meeting with the Queen at one point. So this is definitely going to be one of those foreign trips to really watch a lot of photo ops over the next few days. Nile Gardiner, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.